Just a word of warning before we get started. Today's episode contains graphic descriptions of cruelty to animals from the very start. You wouldn't go to the Faroe Islands, or you would advise me not to go.
I think that the Faroes is distinctly different because of the way the relationship the UK and the Faroes have this trading relationship.
You just mentioned Turkey. Should one not visit Turkey either for the
no,
same reason?
I've made that case. Turkey's a country close to
So
my
where
heart.
would you go?
Well, I personally make
choices.
Would
you go to Spain because of what happens with bullfighting?
There's lots of countries that I have issues
France with
and
foie gras?
I agree. I can campaign against all of them.
Do you go to the United States?
I do go to the United States. There's lots of things I don't disagree with.
I bet you disagree with lots of things they do.
I do. But
also, so why shouldn't I go to the Faroes then?
I'm not saying you shouldn't.
Before you watch today's episode, we want to remind you that tickets are on sale for the newsagent's live shows with HSBC UK. We're kicking off our tour at Birmingham Symphony Hall on February the 17th. Then we're off to the Bridgewater Hall in Manchester, that's on February the 24th. And finally to Usher Hall in Edinburgh on March the 11th. Head over to Global Player to get your tickets for any of those dates. The link will be in the description below. We're really excited to see you there.
The sea turns red. I mean, bright red. Children are encouraged to take part. And in the most gruesome acts, sometimes they slice open the pregnant females and remove their unborn fetuses there on the beach. I mean, this really is despicable behaviour in the 21st century.
That is perhaps Britain's best-known conservationist, Chris Packham, giving me holiday advice, specifically because of the record of the Faroe Islands. Yeah, it is going to be a weird one today. Last night, I posted on Twitter and Blue Sky about my New Year plans, which are to spend a few days in the Faroe Islands, a remote cluster of islands between Scotland and Iceland. Yes, I know, it's a bit odd, but it's supposed to be beautiful and it will certainly be peaceful, and I quite like dragging my wife to slightly weird holiday destinations. Anyway, I wanted, as I often do when I go anywhere, to access the Hive online brain for recommendations, perhaps one of the only nice things to do these days, in particular on the cesspit that is X. How wrong I was. In fact, I managed to pull off the impossible. I united the online right on X and online left on Blue Sky. I woke up to a barrage of angry, furious tweets and posts attacking the idea of visiting the Faroes at all because of their practice of slaughtering whales and dolphins throughout the summer, something they've done for nigh on 1,000 years. And the messages didn't stop coming and reached something of a climax when Chris Packham himself messaged me saying, "Lewis, please don't go. Please go somewhere where the residents don't needlessly and savagely slaughter whales and dolphins 250 miles off the Scottish coast in the midst of a global biodiversity crisis in flagrant spite of the millions of us who love life." I was really intrigued by all of this, intrigued by the ferocity of the responses, which I just did not see coming, intrigued by the idea of a moral culpability, a responsibility for a practice by merely entering a country. How far does that go? And in particular, why one tiny island half-state should attract so much ire rather than Norway or Japan, the big whaling nations, or I don't know, say, the United States, which literally kills human beings on death row on a regular basis, and how social media interacts with these matters. Why do so many people feel so able to be quite so self-righteous about something as simple as a New Year break? What has it all done to our proportion? So, in what could be my last show before I'm cancelled, tin hats on, welcome to the Newsagents.
Let it be known that the socially conscious Lewis Goodall, when he isn't craving the destruction of the English greenbelt for house building, is excited to be spending his New Year's in the heavily sanctioned Faroe Islands for their continued and excessive slaughtering of whales and dolphins. Know them by their actions.
I would suggest that you do a little research into who these people actually are and what they like to do for fun. It may just change your mind.
This shows spectacularly poor judgment. Not sure if there are any tips to watch the needless slaughter of whales and dolphins.
Those are just a few of the messages I received overnight urging me not to visit the Faroes, and indeed, as you heard, suggesting that many would think considerably less of me if I did. And of course there were a few as well from the other side of the argument who advised I should just take up residency there and never come back. So thanks for those lads. We wanted to explore, though, this relationship of whether we are morally responsible for what happens to a place when we go there and how social media warps the conversation. And we thought we'd love to hear, when talking about it with the team this morning, from Chris Packham himself directly. He's He's in South Africa right now, so he sent us this voice note setting out his stall.
Lewis, firstly, I've got to say thank you very, very much indeed for being so bold, brave and progressive and confronting this head on. A lot of others would have run for the Faroese Hills. So it's great that you're giving me and us the opportunity to discuss it. Let me state my case. The Faroes is a small group of islands, and it's no further than about 250 miles off the north of Scotland. And unfortunately, they are still involved with the slaughter of whales and dolphins. And we don't need that meat. The Faroese don't need that meat. They are rich enough and well placed enough to import any food that they need. Boycotts are difficult, I've got to admit. I'm always uncomfortable in asking people to not go to a nation or a destination based upon the activities of some of the population there, because I think it's only appropriate to enact a boycott if you're going to send a clear message, an economic statement, protest, if you like, to the people who are responsible for perpetrating the reason for instigating the boycott. So by going to the Faroes, are you actively supporting those people who are killing these whales and dolphins? Or are you harming an eco-tourist industry, which might grow to the point where they would turn against those people because it would be damaging their interest? That's a difficult balance to strike. It's something you might want to explore before you jump on the plane. But there is one other thing I need to tell you, and that is the degree of savagery involved in this particular slaughter and how well known it is. The animals are found out at sea. They're herded into shallow bays by the fishermen. They then set upon them with what they call spinal lances, which are sharp, long-bladed knives they plunge into the back of the animals. The sea turns red, I mean bright red. They are wading around. Children are encouraged to take part. And in the most gruesome acts, sometimes they slice open the pregnant females and remove their unborn fetuses there on the beach. I mean, this really is despicable behaviour in the 21st century.
So that is Chris Packham urging me not to go to the Faroe Islands, which is not a sentence I thought I'd be saying at the start of the week. I wanted to explore this in a little bit more detail, though, because I think there are really interesting questions about the way that environmentalists put themselves across online in terms of how they try and convince others, or indeed not convince others of their views, but also as to why it is that we might reserve particular ire for certain types of cultures and certain types of cultural practices and not others. So we're joined now by Dominic Dyer, who's a writer, conservationist and chair of the environmental campaign group Nature 2030. Dominic, I've been taken aback by the kind of ferocity, the sort of strength of the emotion about it. Can you just explain why it is that you think so many people feel so strongly about this particular issue?
Well, the Faroe Islands is an interesting place. It's a beautiful place. A lot of film directors go there because it's incredibly beautiful to look at, and it's a popular destination for holidays, even for sort of pop festivals and things these days. So I can understand why you want to go. And in many ways, the Faroese are a very proud people, and they have a great history and heritage, not least if you look back at the Second World War era, because Britain and the Faroes had a very strong relationship. A lot of our servicemen were on the islands. They built the harbour, the runway. And in the war, we might forget that we had significant shortages of food. And most of our fish, which is an important source of protein, came from Iceland, but the Icelandic government wouldn't ship it to Britain. It was the Faroese that did that. And they lost hundreds of their sailors on boats to German mines and submarines and bombers to get us fed during the war. So there's that real strong element of, connection with us historically. And I think that makes, the history of the islands very important and the culture of the islands important. But there's a dark side of it too. They have a very long tradition of whaling. It goes back hundreds of years. Up to the 1940s, you could say up to the sort of post-war era, it was subsistence killing of whales to a large degree. There was a pretty barren place, the Faroes. There's not much in the way of agriculture or food. So the whale meat was an important part of their protein and their diet. But today, the island is one of the most wealthiest island nations in the world. It has all of the food that we take for granted in modern supermarkets. Most people don't eat whale or dolphin meat. It's full of heavy metals. And most of the dolphins and whales that are killed in the most horrible way on the island are just dumped on the ocean bed or just thrown off cliffs into bays.
But some of it is still consumed.
A small amount to be quite frank. And there's freezers full of it on the islands. And I think, the chief medical officer of the islands a number of years ago said to pregnant mothers and to young children they shouldn't be eating it. And if you've ever tried it, it's a required taste. This is a cultural thing, really. Yeah. And I think part of the problem we've had with the Faroes is the British relationship in recent years, a trading relationship. this was an island nation that traded with Europe, so Britain didn't have a distinctly different trading relationship. But when we left the European Union, and it was Liz Truss at the time as trade minister, was rushing around trying to find trade deals to sort of brag that, we were getting these Brexit trade deals. And she made one with the Faroe Islands. And I think it was for about £100 million of export of white fish products, cod, haddock, and some farm fish. Over the last few years, the scale of that trade balance has just hugely gone to the Faroese benefit. Over £1.3 billion worth of fish was imported from the Faroes to the UK last year. And we only sent back £13 million of goods the other way.
I hear all those arguments, and I can understand why people get exercised about it. I suppose what I'm interested in is the idea, though, of going somewhere that sort of endorses everything that happens there. So, for example, would you go on holiday to Norway?
I've been to Norway, and I don't agree with whaling there.
Whaling.
And there's whaling in Iceland.
But you wouldn't go to the Faroe Islands, or you would advise me not to go?
I think that the Faroes is distinctly different because of the way the relationship the UK and the Faroes have this trading relationship where we're enriching this small island nation with a population.
We buy endless amounts of oil and gas off the Norwegians.
Yes, but Norway has a much significant economy elsewhere beyond. It's a big industrialised nation in the sense of small population, but it trades.
So we should
with many
pick on
nations.
them because they're small?
No, I think it's the nature of what they're doing. If you look at, I don't agree with what's being done with one or two operators in Norway killing whales by harpoon, or what the Icelandic government are allowing the licensing of whaling, which is becoming very controversial, to allow a few more operators.
The Norwegians and the Japanese. That's commercial. You can say with the Faroese, it's not commercial, it's cultural, it's historic.
Yeah, but it's barbaric. You are basically taking.
But why isn't it barbaric when the Norwegians do?
No, it's all of this is wrong. Don't get me. I campaign against commercial whaling. I've campaigned against the Japanese breaking out of the International Whaling
But you would
Commission.
go to Norway and Japan?
I wouldn't today. I've done it in the past. As a campaigner now, I wouldn't step into those countries. And to be quite frank, in Japan, I'd probably have some difficulties because I've been very outspoken about Japan and its whaling policies. But the Faroes is distinctly different in my mind because the scale of the increase in trade that we have with this small island, the fact that we're enriching this small island nation on an unprecedented rate, and actually the money that's going into the hands of the people working in the fishing industry, that's in the farm fishing industry and wild fishing industry, is allowing them to take part in this pastime. And it is a pastime when I say this, Lewis.
But
they run these animals into the shore and they butcher them in the most disgusting, horrible way possible.
But who are we to lecture them on what has been, as you yourself accept, has been part of their culture for a millennium? Well, I wonder, for example, would you have the same issue with, say, Canadian North American tribes who slaughter seals for the same sort of things?
If you think about what happened with the seal situation in Europe, we basically stopped the import of seal skins into Europe as an ethical decision because Europe as a whole, member states, decided that the seals were being bludgeoned to death. It wasn't going to endanger them, but it was horribly cruel, and that European consumers didn't want to buy those products. We actually stopped trade and allowing the import of those products.
But would you have a bigger problem with, say, is it because it's European? Because I've got the feeling that you might have less of a problem, or you would be willing to accept the idea of cultural practices that we ourselves might not like for non-Western groups,
if you know anything about my work, I'm critical of many countries, be it what's happening in Turkey at the moment with regards to them rounding up large numbers of street dogs and killing them, which is what the Erdogan government is doing, be it what we see in Taji in Japan, where fishermen kill dolphins.
I totally hear what you're saying, but it's this kind of, we're doing this because in a way I'm just so genuinely interested in the kind of the ferocity of the response and the fact that so many people seem to think that, that's not about me, but no one should go somewhere like the Faroes because of this. And I'm just so interested as to kind of why this tiny little group of people, tiny number of people, in a way should be singled out. Because I'm sure that you wouldn't say, and lots of those people wouldn't say, that one shouldn't visit. You just mentioned Turkey. Should one not visit Turkey either for the same reason?
I've made that case. Turkey's a country close to
my
heart.
So where would you go?
Well, I personally make
choices.
Would
you go to Spain because of what happens with bullfighting?
There's lots of countries that I have issues
France
with.
France with foie gras?
I agree. I can campaign against all of them. But all I'm
saying...
saying...
like Cornwall, because it's the only place you'll be able to go on holiday.
and I campaign against cruelty to animals in this country.
Yeah.
Against fox hunting and other things we do, of course. I think the issue with the Faroes is distinctly different to a degree because the fact is that we're enabling and enriching a group of people to carry out a practice that's in complete contravention of UK government policies. For example, the Environment, Food, Rural Affairs Committee last year had a review of marine mammal protection. And within that review process, we all gave evidence, including me, about the Faroes and other parts of the world. All the MPs of all that party came back and said, if we had a trade agreement post-Brexit with a country like the Faroes and we negotiated it, we should have built in a mechanism to say, listen, we're very happy to trade with you and enrich you, but we actually want to stop you doing this, which is in complete contravention of our government policy on protecting marine mammals. That's an ethical trade policy about protecting wildlife abroad. I feel quite strongly about that.
We wouldn't do lots of things. Lots of countries have lots of environmental policies and policies towards animals that we wouldn't ourselves do. It doesn't mean we don't deal with them. It doesn't mean we don't encourage our citizens or think it's okay for our citizens to go to those countries. I mean, I bet you, like I don't agree with the death penalty. No, it doesn't stop me visiting the United States.
Yes, I fully agree with that. But equally, you've got to try.
Do you go to the United States?
I do go to the United States. There's lots of things I don't disagree with.
I bet you disagree with lots of things they do.
I do. But also,
so why shouldn't I go to the Faroes?
No,
then?
I'm not saying you shouldn't. What I'm saying is that we wanted to bring to your attention.
That is what everyone is
and that's
saying.
why we're here now. And I'm really grateful because your audience, large influential audience, will get an understanding a bit about why we feel so passionate about it. It's not that we're saying to the Faroese that you've got no culture or rights and you should stop doing things, because they say to us, and some people on the Faroes say, well, you eat meat and you kill meat, so how can you tell us
large-scale commercial fishing, which is very environmentally damaging.
But you've got to take each case as you find it. Ultimately, I would like the Faroese government and the Faroese people to continue to have a prosperous trade relationship with the UK, and that benefits the islands.
But you did say don't holiday there, Lewis. You did say that to me this morning.
I did, on the basis I think you weren't aware of this issue. If you'd have said, I'm going to the Faroes, I'm aware of the concerns about where dolphin, I don't agree with it, but I'm going to go there anyway. But I'd be very happy to talk about it. I am still
going to go there. I appreciate the conversation because, as I say, I don't see the link, the moral link between. I'm not going to do any whaling. No. I'm not going to do any. I'm not going to eat any whale meat. So I don't see the kind of moral link between visiting somewhere. You're not endorsing everything that country or that state does.
So that's a choice you make every day about anything we do. It is. But ultimately, what we're trying to say here is that for example, there was a case last year with a cruise ship that came into the Faroe Islands, and it's a big cruise ship destination. And people are on the top deck of the cruise ship, and they were looking out on this beautiful island, and suddenly they were looking across a bay that was blood red, and there were animals being butchered in front of their eyes, right? And the people on the cruise ship said, oh my God, no one told me this was going on. The CEO of the company was dragged into the media studios to say, well, what's your view on this? Well, we don't like this. We'd like to see it end. What we're saying is this, right? This is a horrible, horrible, cruel thing. And cruelty matters. That's what I deal with all the time. Cruelty for no reason. There might have been a reason in the past. Aboriginal whaling still goes on, and I don't disagree with the need to regulate and control that. Communities taking small amounts of whale meat that they consume. It's a big issue, halal and kosher. I personally would like to see halal and kosher slaughter methods end, but I have concern about stunned slaughter methods as well, because it's not perfect, or the gassing of pigs. So we could talk about all slaughter methods as being open to question as to how much cruelty they involve. And I'm vegetarian, so I'm not eating those products. But they're choices I make. But just coming back to the Faroes, I think that the British government has an opportunity to have a very good conversation with the Faroese government to say that we're against the killing of whales and dolphins in this way. We'd like to see you end this. And the trade relationship we have, we will continue, but we actually want to build in a mechanism by which we're quite happy to use it as leverage to get you to change this. Now, there are lots of people on the island that agree with that view too. And there are other issues here. There are children that come down and look at this, all right? There's a tradition of bringing children into the killing and hunting. Now, if you've ever been in a situation, I haven't seen it firsthand. I know lots of people that have.
Well, I think we can watch some of it now. I think we've got it. I mean, obviously
this
people
is
listening...
pretty,
and we should say this is... People are watching it. It is graphic, so
Yes.
you might want to look away if you don't. But I think we thought we might as well confront what it is.
Yes.
It's not nice to see. It's not. I don't think anyone would enjoy watching it.
And they bring children down to see
And they bring children.
Yeah, and the children often sit on the carcasses, or they look at the horror and the sound, the smell, the noise of doing this physically. And there's a high level of domestic violence on the islands, and there's many people who work in this area that will say this type of activity, which is generational, where you're bringing young people into this who become the killers themselves, in a small island nation is actually quite dangerous.
And they could turn to us and say, have you been to one of your abattoirs or your commercial fishing farms? And I accept you're a vegetarian, so you have consistency on it, but who are we?
No, who are we? But ultimately, if we feel that this is acceptable behaviour in a modern island nation of a very high standard of living, that we have a significant trade relationship that we're enriching, I would disagree. I think governments have a moral responsibility to protect wildlife and to stop cruelty. And I think if they have influence, we should use it in this case.
Do you think social media ever... I mean, it's obviously... I find it very interesting to sort of think about. But do you think sometimes, maybe, particularly with people who maybe don't have big followings and aren't used to it, people can be a little lecturing of others on social media about their choices?
Yeah, of course it can be.
And there's a little bit of
I'm well aware
hectoring.
at times that, I've got quite a big social media following of animal people, and they're very vocal. And there are times when I can get involved in something and suddenly it goes huge.
Yeah.
I'll give you an example of 2, bull terriers that were killed in Limehouse about 18 months ago by the police in a very difficult situation. Very graphic video emerged of those 2 dogs being shot with shotguns underneath a balcony of a flats and people looking down. You can imagine the noise. It was a horrible thing to watch. I got that video and I shared it, and millions of people around the world shared it. And in the end, the Independent Office of Police Investigation has an investigation now, the officer's concerned. Or I can give you an example of the cow that was knocked down by police in London. Again, I was one of the most vocal elements there, and the police officer was suspended, and a whole discussion. Even took 2 days out of a general election campaign, that issue, talking about that cow. But, there are times when I'm asked to come into studios like this and reflect on what I see as being a violent intervention. It could be by the authorities, it could be by individuals, and as to whether that was the right or the wrong thing to do.
There's a tonal thing sometimes, isn't there? Particularly when you're trying to convince people. I'm not saying you're doing it, and you're doing it in a very respectful way, but there is a particular...
No, it can get very nasty, and in situations like that... It can get nasty
when you're trying to convince others.
Officers I know that have been involved in those areas have threats made against them. I don't agree with any of that. In terms of the Faroes, to be frank, there's actually quite a lot of nationalist elements on the Faroes that make threats against the people that go out to look at this. You have individuals that go out to monitor this and take photography and drones. In the past, this has got very confrontational. We're talking about Paul Watson today. Paul Watson has been an ocean campaigner, a former founder of Greenpeace, one of the leading advocates of direct action to protect whales and marine mammals. He's been in prison for the last 2 months in Greenland, in a solitary confinement, a 78-year-old man, because he was in that part of the world and he was basically arrested under an international arrest warrant by the Japanese government, because of what he did in terms of trying to stop them going back into the Arctic commercial whaling. But also, he's been one of the most strongest advocates against this. He's had his activist, Sea Shepherd, it's now Paul Watson Foundation, on the islands. And back in 2015, 2016, the Danish government brought in destroyers and helicopters and marines to haul activists off the beach who were trying to just basically tell the world that this was wrong. So you can see at times government will intervene, governments with vested interest, to protect what they might consider cultural norms in a certain part of the world. This is where wildlife politics can get very difficult. But my view is always this: we should strive, Lewis, whatever we might think, to reduce animal cruelty. We should strive to reduce exploitation and killing for wildlife for no reason, because this world is in such a mess when it comes to wildlife and habitats. This does not need to happen. This is not to feed the Faroese. This is just basically trying to keep a bloodfest alive. This is like fox hunting on steroids. They're using helicopters, high-powered boats, drones. They're driving in hundreds of animals. In September 2021, they killed over 1,080 white-sided dolphins in one day. One day, the biggest slaughter of dolphins anywhere in recorded history on this island. Is that acceptable? Should that happen? This used to happen off the coast of Scotland at the turn of the century. They used to kill whales like this, but they stopped it. No longer acceptable in this country to see that.
But we've
no
made
longer
that decision
needed.
for ourselves.
Because historically it happened. They used to eat the meat. But this has just gone on and been allowed to go on.
And the Faroese aren't the developing country, but there are lots of developing countries who do get rather sick, don't they, of us telling them.
Of course.
Particularly given the huge hypocrisy which exists on our part. We've deforested, we've killed so much of our biodiversity, we've released endless amounts of carbon into the atmosphere, and they get a little irked with Western environmentalists and campaigners and conservationists telling them what to do, which I can understand.
They can, but also that many animal wildlife advocates, conservationists, environmentalists end up imprisoned or killed in certain parts of the world for speaking up. If I look at Turkey, where I do a lot of campaigning, one of the biggest human rights debates is an animal rights debate. Young women now, getting into the streets in Turkey, big protests across Turkey against what is a government policy of Erdogan to basically round up millions of street dogs, put them into shelters and kill them. Now, I think that's a good thing. I've known Turkey a long time. You need freedom of rights, you need human rights. Sometimes it's animal issues that trigger it more than human issues, and it empowers people to speak up, and it brings people together across political boundaries. I can tell you now that people that oppose this of all political views.
Of course.
And I think that's what we're really trying to say here.
Well, Dominic, I've really enjoyed talking to you, and I've enjoyed the conversation. I didn't expect to be having it this morning, but it's been really intriguing.
Go to the Faroes and enjoy it, because it's a beautiful place. But at least you know this is
But I will do half of mine on this. Where are you off to at New Year?
I'm going to stay at home.
You know what? That was a good answer.
Yeah, I know.
I'm off to Tokyo.
And I'll be talking about fox hunting on Boxing Day. There you go, because the issues never go away, do they?
Fair enough, Dominic. Lovely to meet you.
Thank you. It's a pleasure.
Right, that is enough of that. I don't think I'm going to be cancelling my holidays just yet, although I may never, ever ask for anyone's recommendation ever again. Recommendations are out for 2025. Coming up next, we're going to be talking about matters a little bit more familiar. Well, from the Faroe Islands back to Westminster. which is where some people might have thought we would start today's show, but hey, we didn't. That's just the kind of freewheeling day it is, not least because Emily and John are not here. But instead, there's no problem about that whatsoever, because by no popular demand whatsoever, we've got Aggie Chambre, LBC political correspondent, and Natasha Clarke, LBC political editor, back, sat in their seats. And frankly, I couldn't be happier.
We've never done this double lap before, and I'm very excited about it.
And frankly, if I were John and Emily, I might start worrying about it.
I would start worrying for them.
Yeah.
Can we do the I'm Natasha?
Oh, yeah, do you want to do it?
Yeah.
Should we do it? All right, okay, right, let's do it. It's Lewis.
It's Aggie.
It's Natasha.
Brilliant. Okay.
Nailed it.
Absolutely nailed it. You got the job. So we're going to talk a little bit about Keir Starmer, and in particular, a criticism which has been coming up again and again. And you're hearing it sort of aired in the papers more, but now I think even maybe some MPs, which is, well, it's this term that people have started to use, which is never hear Keir, which suggests that he would much rather be abroad rather than being in Britain. And indeed, we were just totting up before we came on how many trips he's been on in his 6 months. And we made it 22 total trips with 31 days away, which when you consider that he's been Prime Minister for 6 months, is quite some going. Do you think this is this fair?
Well, it is completely fair to the point that he has gone on more foreign trips comparatively to his predecessors. I mean, if you look at Rishi Sunak.
The Faroe Islands.
Or
Not yet.
Not yet. I mean, he'll probably listen to this episode and then sort of.
Well, I'm going to get
immediately
cancelled
a
after
flight.
today, so there's no way he's going there.
He'll
It's the
learn,
one
he'll
place
learn
he'll
from your
never go.
mistakes.
Yeah.
But Rishi Sunak only went on 22 trips. Truss, I mean, she was only there for about a day or two, but
Can't compare it, I'm afraid.
went on a couple. So I think that is fair just on the stats alone, that he has gone on more foreign trips. The counter to that, which people around him would say, is, you know, Britain had cut itself off from the rest of the world. Starmer and his team are trying to kind of reset relations in Europe. They feel these events are non-negotiable. I mean, one Number 10 person did say to me perhaps he could have skipped out on Samoa, which I think lots of people thought after the main conversation there was about reparations, which I think was difficult. But having said that, I think part of the problem over the last 5 months is that the narrative hasn't been completely clear, and lots of backbench MPs aren't completely clear on the narrative and feel like they don't have a great relationship with Keir Starmer. In fact, a lot of them don't know Keir Starmer at all. And so I think if you couple those things together, the fact that he has been away a lot and then these Labour MPs feel a bit out in the cold, and when they've had to go out and sell things like, winter fuel, and, ministers have said, OK, we'll go out and sell it, and then they feel they don't have a direct line to the boss, I think those things coupled together have been difficult.
Aggie, you just mentioned Sunak. I mean, I remember, I'm sure we all do, he was getting leathered all the time for not being interested in foreign affairs. Indeed, he basically hired David Cameron, right? Because
to be his
he
man on
wasn't
the world
very
stage,
interested
right?
in foreign affairs.
And yeah, look, some Labour MP said to me earlier, like, at least David Cameron looked like he was enjoying the job, and Keir Starmer on the world stage less so. But it is part of the government's attempt to try and reset those relationships. I don't know if I buy the fact that they were that bad to begin with, to be honest with you. I think Rishi Sunak was seen as quite a statesman on the world stage. He had been Chancellor before and had all those relationships with these countries anyway.
Well, he did the Windsor Framework with the...
Yeah, I think so. But yeah, like, I do think Labour MPs repeatedly are saying to me, Keir Starmer needs to be in the UK more next year. And I think that is definitely something, it's filtered down to the extent that it's now a joke on X. Oh, breaking news, Keir Starmer's going to be in the UK tomorrow. It's become an actual meme now. So I think it is worrying people in Number 10. And I think they do know and they do acknowledge they need to be better at selling these trips abroad. Like, if you remember a couple of weeks ago when he was in, I think it was Azerbaijan, which someone said, actually, I don't think we should have gone to that one either. But they were talking about windmills in Hull and turbine parts or whatever it might be. And they know that they have to sell what they're doing abroad in terms of business, investment and jobs, and actually what it means to people.
So I suppose maybe this is the criticism, right? Which actually, we talk about Labour a bit more widely. It often sort of basically circles back to this, right? Which is that Starmer is doing a lot. And I actually think that the whole narrative about the government struggling so much, in some ways, I don't think there is actually quite a lot you can point to in different areas about what the government is doing. And there is quite a lot of activity. What there very rarely is any kind of adhesive, binding kind of narrative to sort of tie it all together. And in a way, kind of the foreign stuff, it feels to me, which I actually think is an absurd criticism. I mean, he's the Prime Minister, for Christ's sake. I mean, the world's on fire. Like, deal with it. Who else can go? Like, we could send the Foreign Secretary.
Well, maybe David Lammy. That
yeah,
was the
but
point
there's a lot of world out there, right?
One MP literally said to me earlier today, why isn't David Lammy doing all of this stuff and why aren't we seeing him? Like, he is the Foreign Secretary. Go send him out, go and do stuff. That is a criticism that a lot of people are saying.
Sure, I get that. But I mean, I suppose, like I say, the world's on fire. I think I think the problem is, in a way, I wonder whether you occasionally hear people talk about this as well, right? Which is that maybe Starmer kind of almost feels like these meetings have a purpose in and of themselves, rather than they necessarily manifest or translate to anything. Or when they do translate to something, he doesn't really express what it is, or he doesn't express what it is especially effectively. I mean, in a way, the kind of complete opposite would be Liz Truss when she was Foreign Secretary and Trade Secretary, who was actually accomplishing almost nothing. I mean, like with all the trade
But it
stuff.
looked great, yeah.
Well, yeah, I mean, and people will find that really vacuous, right? But it is true that when she was basically just doing all of those rollover trade deals all the time, which were literally just what we had before, but she made it look, and albeit she had a receptive press in the Brexit press, but she made it look like it was amazing and it was sort of cutting edge and she was doing lots of stuff. It's kind of the opposite maybe of what Starmer's doing.
I think that is the problem. I think that's what some people say. You know, if you're going to go on all these trips, sell it better, come out at the end of it and say what you've achieved. Because we've heard him say, you know, with relations with Europe, he's going to reset over and over and over again. And actually it's not exactly clear what he's getting out of these foreign trips. So I think that is part of the problem.
We still don't know what we want from the reset, right? We still don't know.
No, exactly. And I think part of it as well, as you touched on there, it's not that they're not doing very much. They are doing loads. And actually what they're trying to do is kind of front load all of the difficult decisions up front. So they're kind of trying to do loads and loads and loads of things. And actually that is part of what has been difficult for people. And then you have all these new MPs saying, oh, well, you know, I'm having a difficult time. And Keir Starmer's not even in the country. But I think there's also this kind of discrepancy with what Keir Starmer sees the job as and even what people around him see the job as. Someone said to me that a senior civil servant had basically been told by Keir, I see 50% of my job as foreign and 50% as economy and growth. Really? And I think that is sort of not exactly what people around him think. And I think there are, as Tash kind of pointed out, people in Number 10 who are a bit concerned about all of this foreign travel, a bit concerned that this is the narrative. But he obviously sees himself as this statesman. He sees this as this really, really important part of his job.
And where was Foreign Affairs on the 6 missions milestones, right? Like, that's meant to be his agenda for government, the steps for change, the missions, the milestones. You know, that I think people in Number 10 will say, well, actually, that's a foundation. That's, you know, national security, protecting our borders. That's something baseline that, you know, someone said about the sort of missions, this is all just baseline stuff that the government should be doing anyway, right? So surely you see foreign travel as part of that anyway. I think many MPs will just say, actually, the NHS, jobs, you know, actually delivering on the things you said you were going to do.
That's what he's got a cabinet for, isn't it?
Yeah.
That's what he's got his cabinet for.
Yeah,
to do those things.
Well, delegation is definitely important, but I think there is a lot of concern amongst a lot of people that, you know, dissatisfaction in him now pretty much record low.
That is definitely true.
Dissatisfaction in the government, something like 70%. If you're not showing as well as telling, and Keir Starmer I don't think is very good at doing arguably either of those two things.
So you're saying that MPs actually, they see the foreign travel and there's a particular reason they get annoyed?
I think so. I mean, I should say they do feel there's been greater engagement since Sue Gray left. Everyone always says everything's better since Sue Gray left. Poor Sue Gray. But and Starmer does have these lunches with MPs after PMQs. He takes them out and they all chat. Apparently it's quite weird because it's just everyone kind of asking Keir Starmer questions. But there is this feeling that he doesn't really have great relationships with a lot of them. And one Labour MP said to me that it makes PMQs quite difficult for him because people will ask questions and he sort of doesn't have that familial relation with them. So he's sort of
thank you.
Yeah, he sort of he
says
does
thank you at the end of the question, which was really odd.
Yeah,
thank you.
And he can't kind of, Tony Blair would say, oh yes, and of course we talked about this, and would kind of have a relationship with everyone, so would manage to do it in a much more.
Well, there are 400 of them, right? Like,
how
are you going to know all of them instantly?
Of course, but that is kind of one of the criticism of him. The other criticism is that I'm told that he changed his number when he got into government. Of course, something, you know, you do when you become Prime Minister and get into government. But this adds to the feeling that they don't really have a way to get hold of him, a way to kind of talk to him, which kind of adds to that feeling that basically they're just a bit ostracised from power and they never see Keir Starmer in the tea rooms. And I think someone said they thought, oh, maybe it's because he kind of came of political age in the Jeremy Corbyn era where the PLP wasn't really functioning. So maybe he doesn't really understand how it's supposed to work, but he just doesn't have those kind of great relationships across the PLP.
He's too old for all that stuff. Making all those new friends. He's 60 for Christ's sake. He ain't got time.
Yeah, but you do need to keep your MPs on side because he's going to need them at some point. At the moment, we don't have any huge battles coming down the track. But
there's never been a huge Starmer faction, right? There's never been. I mean, there's a bit more of one now because you've got some of the Labour Together people in there, but there's never been. It's always been quite contingent.
They are quite separated. But at some point, there's going to be a big rebellion. It's going to come down the track, and Starmer's going to need to call in his MPs, all of the groups, all of his allies, and actually get them out to vote. And I don't know if he's going to be prepared for that. The
thing, I mean, leaving aside the sort of foreign travel stuff, which I suppose, you know, is important insofar as apparently it is starting to show up in focus groups and people are starting to express it. And as you say, Aggie, as well, I mean, you know, there are MPs dissatisfied by it. Okay, fine. But I mean, the biggest thing, right, actually, in terms of the last week, as we head into the end of the political year, is the economy is starting to look really dicey, like properly dicey. I mean, if you take the last 4 days, what did we have on Friday? We had the unexpected contraction in October of 0.1%, which no one saw coming. So, you know, we could well be heading to a recession. And even the hiring managers index, which was out, 2 days ago, which again didn't get that much coverage, was really important, showed that firms are now shedding jobs at their fastest rate, if you exclude the pandemic, which is obviously exceptional, since 2009. 2009 not being a happy year in the economic world. It is particularly politically problematic for the government, right? Because that is something that, unlike everything else they can say and do right now, you can point at a government policy, i.e. the rise in employee index, national insurance, and say, that's what it's about. It isn't exclusively about that, it won't be, but it will be a big part of it, and Rachel Reeves will have to carry the can.
I think Rachel Reeves will absolutely have to carry the can. I mean, you know, they have bet the house on growth. They've bet the house on the fact that they believe that they're going to be able to grow living standards slightly less than it was supposed to be. What was the aim? The aim is...
it's now an aim.
Yeah.
We will do it.
Yeah, exactly. To get the highest growth in the G7 is now an aim rather than something they actually say they're definitely going to do. But I think it's going to be really, really difficult. And I think it kind of does, in a way, come back to the same point over, you know, Keir Starmer. I mean, I don't know whether you guys have heard the same thing, being told that he has basically handed the economy, as you'd expect, right, to Rachel Reeves. He says, you know, the economy is yours. As Chancellor, you are in charge of this.
Pretty weird for a Prime Minister to do, right? I mean, like...
Do you think?
I think so, yeah. I mean, like, when you know how central it is... I mean, you know, think of how many of the missions are basically economic. They know that basically they have to get growth going and it has to be widely felt. And I think that maybe just speaks to how ill at ease he feels with it more than anything else, don't you think?
I think that's exactly the point. I mean,
Yeah.
a Labour grandee said to me, you know, basically, Keir Starmer isn't that au fait with the economy, especially not compared to Rachel Reeves. But the point with those two, which I think makes it really difficult, is the fact that everybody says there's basically kind of a cigarette paper between them. They are really, really close politically. And so they are completely interlinked, even though there have been some questions from, I mean, I had it from a minister saying they'd be surprised if Rachel Reeves was still Chancellor by the end of this Parliament. I mean, I put that to the Treasury and they responded, this story is as ridiculous as the person that briefed it. But that is the kind of chat that is circulating, and you can understand why when you hear about those kind of dire economic figures. I mean, that will be seriously worrying people.
I think this is going to be the big story of 2025 is the economy and whether it does take a downturn. Talking to people in government, talking to people in the Treasury, they seem really tin-eared by all of these. It just feels to me like the economic lights are flashing red on the dashboard and nobody is really paying that much attention. Like, I do hope there are people in the Treasury that are worried about it, but the people I'm speaking to are going, we had no choice, we had to raise taxes, we had to do all these things. But actually, if the economy starts slowing down, if we do go into a recession, if people stop hiring, you know, that is Keir Starmer's entire mission for the country just blown up in year one. That can't be allowed to happen. And the people that I'm speaking to in the Treasury don't seem as worried as I think they should be.
I think that is the thing that people say, right, we didn't have a choice, we got in, there was a £22 billion black hole. But the point is, they did have a choice. The choice was potentially a little bit earlier during the general election campaign, but they did have a choice. You know, they
box yourself in.
They boxed themselves in.
Also, the highest growing economy in the G7. That was always going to be quite a pie in the sky aim for them.
I know, and then it just sounds so ridiculous when they get in and say, oh, well, actually, government's a bit harder than we thought. I mean, how did they not have people around them during the general election campaign that said, you are going to win, just don't box yourself in this way?
But don't you think that there's loads of things that I'm surprised they don't show more urgency about? I mean, the one thing to me that is stalking British politics right now, and will stalk their fortunes, is the prospect, which we are just literally seeing unfold before our eyes day after day after day, is of Musk's money, or some variant of Musk's money from somewhere, flowing into reform. Now, maybe it happened, maybe it won't happen. But what it does show, even the conversation shows about it, is that our electoral law, both in terms of kind of how easy it would be to do that, and, you know, kind of laws which govern our media spaces online, are so out of date. They're so antiquated. They basically haven't been properly updated for about 20 years. And you can just see this space that maybe, you know, reform would be able to occupy and be able to use this money to transform the political game. But I don't get any sense when I sort of bring this up occasionally with Labour people of that much urgency about it, or any sense of, maybe we should get ahead of this and start, we could actually bring the Tories on board. The Tories don't want to see this happen either, and actually show some kind of urgency about these big, but I don't get any sense of it at all.
No, I think that's right. I mean, we talked about this, but I think from Labour MPs, there are a few of them who, to use Natasha's analogy, who are looking at the dashboard going, oh my goodness, we need to sort this out really, really fast. But in government, I mean, I heard a minister basically saying, well, this was in our manifesto. What does that mean? What on earth does that mean?
We'll
I know it was in their manifesto, but crack on and get on with it, because this is someone who's going to be in the American government very, very soon. There's a huge amount of money that could properly change the game, and they just don't seem like they're doing anything very, very quickly about it.
The reform threat, though, is, I think, going to be the second biggest story of 2025. How reform prioritise themselves, how they professionalise, whether they pick up council seats, whether they continue to have the impact that they can have, where they get their money from, is going to be a huge part of that, and their success. The fact we haven't really talked about it too much at all, and it sort of went by as a bit of a media bubble story. The idea of Nick Candy, the former Tory donor, raking in now billions of pounds for reform is huge.
It's huge, but
no one seems to be that worried about it.
Yeah.
No, it's a big
You're
story.
Not
listening. Sorry, it was a big story. No, it was, and I don't think the wider media are talking about it, and I don't think the wider government are really realising the threat from reform, apart from arguably Morgan McSweeney, who we know does care about the threat from reform, and we know that is trying to show the change that he wants to see the government deliver, and to see that actually, taking steps to deliver, he says, that change is the way to beat off reform. How long do you give the government, I think, to deliver that change is going to be a real key question for the next kind of year of this government, right? We've had 6 months, and arguably they have kicked off a lot. There's a lot of work going on in government, but equally some of the really big decisions, the NHS review, the 10-year plan coming in the spring, the defence review coming in the spring, lots of big decisions kicked into the long grass, the short grass, for review after review after review. The government's again at some point have to take some really big decisions, but equally at some point they're going to have to say, this is what we've delivered for you so far, let us continue to make the job, because otherwise people are just going to continue to grow more dissatisfied with the Labour government, and they are going to go straight into the arms of reform if they don't deliver.
Am I the only person excited by the council changes they announced yesterday? No one else will talk to me about the council change. I tried to pitch it to our editor today to do the whole show about it. I've never seen a man look more bored in my life.
They told me.
Instead we're doing something about the Faroe Islands and my holiday plans.
What does it mean, Lewis? What does council changes mean for me?
Really, but
what does it mean for my
exciting.
bins?
No, it is exciting. Look, just in case you haven't heard about this, this is actually the biggest change to local government. The problem is when you start, even the queue doesn't work.
Sorry, I'm already
just immediately put on my phone to start texting.
You're like John Sopel, he does that every bloody day in that seat. No, it's the biggest change to basically the English state for decades. They're going to abolish district councils, they're going to abolish county councils, you're going to
Great idea. There shouldn't be 3 or 4 layers of
I agree with that. You're going to make every council unitary. But it is also complicated with the government saying they want more localism, because arguably it's less localism. But it's all about planning, right? It's all about being able to make sure which I actually think is probably their most, when we're talking about them doing stuff on the quiet, that's the planning stuff is the radical stuff.
But okay, so one of the things that I think is really interesting with that is the fact that it is actually quite radical. It is going to piss people off. And there are a few things that they're doing that are going to piss people off, as well as the kind of raising taxes. But there's a few things, and I think it does, when people say to me, we are basically doing the stuff that's going to be controversial, that's going to be radical, that's going to be difficult at the beginning, and compare it to 2010, 2011, where George Osborne was doing that omni-shambles budget, when he was doing the
huge austerity, right? They did
austerity
that early.
marches. George Osborne was getting booed at the Olympics, and then they say, it looked really, really, really bad for them. And then, although Liberals didn't do so well, and then 2015, they've done the difficult stuff,
and they have got time,
and they have got time, and they do point out that they have got time, and they think that it might all just end up being okay.
And they've got lots more time for the Prime Minister's foreign travel. Which of these, of the Prime Minister's destinations since July, which would you choose? So we've got Washington, Berlin, Paris, Dublin, Washington, New York, Brussels, Samoa. That's a glittering prize.
That's a good one.
Budapest, Paris, Azerbaijan, Rio, the UAE, Saudi Arabia, Cyprus, Norway, and Estonia.
Okay, I want to go to Trump Tower and sit in with that very weird sounding dinner with David Lammy, Keir Starmer and Donald Trump, where
Donald who did the most talking.
Donald Trump offered David Lammy seconds, and they were so delighted by this. They briefed it out as a sign of goodwill between Trump and Lammy. That's the one I want to go to.
Go on, David. Fill your boots, my friend.
I mean, he didn't need to go to Azerbaijan, did he?
Was that where you
Did
wanted
he-
to
Baku's lovely at this time of
Did
year.
he need to go to Samoa?
Yeah, I bet he didn't like going to Samoa. He was on a plane basically for 36 hours with
Right?
the lobby. Who would like that? That's
Well,
everyone's worst
yeah,
idea. That's
it is.
everyone's personal hell, apart from going to the Faroe Islands.
Washington was good fun. When I was in Washington for NATO, that was a good one.
Oh, right, the ones you go to. You like.
Yeah, well, yeah,
Right,
obviously.
okay.
That was good because it was like directly after the election. Everybody was quite excited. They were all like, right, it's time for us to go. Let's go. And that was quite a good one, I think. And there was quite a lot of, this when.
Aggie's turn next time.
Yeah, no, sorry, I do owe you one. But,
on record? So.
Yeah, that's true.
Thanks for stepping into the breach.
Thanks for having us.
No, not at all. Come back again.
Okay.
Soon. Possibly
Poison-
even as soon as a
poison
couple
John
of
and
days.
Emily.
Yeah. Honestly, well, no one's going to miss them. Thanks so much. Right, that is it from all of us for today. No John and Emily today. Unfortunately, they've been stood up by a significant member of the royal family. So hopefully, all being well, they'll be back tomorrow. And we have still got some tickets left, in particular for our Birmingham live show. I cannot believe that you, my fellow Brummies Bab, would let me down by not welcoming your prodigal son home on the 17th of February. That's at Symphony Hall, and you can get the tickets via Global Player. We will see you tomorrow. Bye for now.
The Newsagents. This is a Global Player original podcast.